In May 2009, Sri Lanka's decades-long civil war with the Tamil Tigers, the liberation tiger of Tamil Eelam came to a bloody close after government forces launched a massive offensive. What exactly happened during the last days of the battle is still the subject of fierce debate. But it is clear that as the rebel perimeter shrank, around a third of million civilians were trapped between two armies and tens and thousands were killed. The government says the LTT were using civilians as human shields. Tamil exiles say the deaths were a result of indiscriminate shelling by the Sri Lankan army. The LTT was crushed in the offensive, most of its leaders killed and thousands were captured and imprisoned. But the Sri Lankan government has so far refused to agree to an independent international war crimes investigation. Now, a United Nations panel has found that the allegations against both sides are credible, saying they may have committed serious violations of humanitarian law. Here's a detailed report. Some of the images in their film are deeply disturbing.
When the Sri Lankan President Mahinda Rajapaksa visited the UK last December, he was greeted by severe protests outside his hotel. Many in the Tamil diaspora accused the Sri Lankan government of committing war crimes during the final stages of the conflict with Tamil Tigers.
My people, everything dead. My mom, my dad, small people, everything dead. This is arresting. This is England is police arresting.
President Rajapaksa's visit was cut short. The diaspora continues over disturbing images like these to spur in national demands over war crimes investigation. These are dead female Tamil tigers believed to be filmed by a Sri Lankan soldier. Yet at a parade last year celebrating the end of the war, the president praised the conduct of his troops. In May 2009, with Prabhakaran dead, the remaining 290,000 people were interned in camps. The government prevented the UN legal experts appointed by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon from visiting Sri Lanka. Many survivors bribed guards and fled abroad, where their destiny formed some of the 4,000 submissions to the panel. Sri Lankan soldiers gave information on probable atrocities. The final UN report, an advance copy of which was provided to the Sri Lankan government, was leaked last week by a Sri Lankan newspaper. The full report of some 200 pages, to be released imminently, dismisses Sri Lanka's domestic judicial process as a decoy and calls for a full international investigation.
The government said from day one, when it began its offensive, that it would take all possible precautions to protect civilians, and in effect, it never did. It used a scorched earth policy, and we began to see that in January 2009. They don't want people to interview in the area where the final assault occurred, and they're not allowing NGOs or humanitarian organizations full and free access. They say they are. They say everything's normal, but it's not. The government announced sequentially that there would be no fire zones, so people retreated to places where they thought they would be safe. Civilians had every reason to think that if they went to these places, they would not be attacked, but they were consistently attacked. I mean, the LTTE bears, I think, the most responsibility for what happened to the civilians in the end, because they held them as hostages. They used them as human shields. The leadership never showed any real concern for the fate of civilians when the final assault began by the government.
Experts say the government of Sri Lanka duped the UN, foreign journalists, diplomats and world leaders. Their first line of defense remains a concoction of blanket denial, smooth assurances and indignant bluster.
Now we have to put this past behind, and if we start talking about all these atrocities done by start investigations, and atrocities done by the LTT and killings and all these things, it's useless. Now we have to move forward, and LTT was developed into a huge military organization. For close to 30 years, they occupied certain areas. They controlled major areas in the north and the east. We have not bombed any hospital. And remember, there is no cases of incident to prove that there were casualties in any hospital. So this is why these are just, the propaganda used by the LTTE.
I've heard people say things look better, but they feel worse. Any talk about civil and political rights is seen as irrelevant at best and subversive at worst. So the argument is the government defeated terrorism with a single-mindedness of purpose. Now it will do likewise with economic development. No questions asked. You join the bandwagon and you proceed.
2 years after the end of the war, foreign reporters and humanitarian workers still do not have access to the alleged crime scene, the final battlefield. The Sri Lankan government has had ample time to destroy the confetti of evidence. Meantime, it touts its brand of the war on terror as a self-evident success.
It's clear that the conditions that people faced and continue to face are simply not acceptable and do not meet international standards.
Almost 2 years since the war has ended, the situation remains very grim for people living in the north and east. There are still very serious human rights abuses occurring.
There are thousands of survivors from what a UN panel of judicial experts now alleges is likely one of the 21st century's large-scale war crimes. By January 2009, the army of Sri Lanka had penned the remnants of the Tamil Tiger guerrilla forces into a pocket of land. It was the culminating moment of a 30-year civil war. For 5 months, determined to kill the Tiger leader Velupillai Prabhakaran, the army pounded Tiger positions and about 330,000 Tamil civilians. By then, civilians were being held hostage by the rebels, but the army continued its assault. According to the UN report, the army also systematically shelled hospitals and denied humanitarian aid to civilians. It finds credible claims that tens of thousands were killed by shelling.
அதென்றால் எப்படி கண்ணால பார்க்கலாத நிலைமையாகும். அப்படி விழுந்து விழுந்து கிடக்க நாங்க அப்படி கடந்து கடந்து இப்படி குனிஞ்சு தான் வந்தோம். இஞ்சால வரும் அப்படி அது கூட ரவுண்ட்ஸ் வரும். அப்ப இப்படி தவண்டன் சில வேளையில வந்திருக்கிறோம். ஒரு படியை நட்டு கிடக்குற அக்கா எங்கேயும் கொண்டு போங்கன்னு சொல்ல, அப்ப நான் எங்கட தம்பி மாதிரி கிடக்குன்னு சொல்ல, அப்ப அப்படி வரையலாது. அப்ப நாங்க தூக்கி கொண்டு போனா நாங்க 2 பேரும் தூக்கலாம்.
இந்த பாருங்கம்மா, எந்த கையை முறிச்சு கொண்டு எந்த மகன் இருக்கிற கண்ணன் தெரியா காதும் தெரியும் காப்பரிச்சு வேண்டிட்டு குடிச்சது போன அப்புறம் தம்பி மகனுக்கு செல்ல நடத்தி கணவரை இயக்கம் தான் சுட்டது சுட்டி சேர்த்தது. இப்போ பிள்ளை தடுப்பில் இருக்குது. எனக்கு ஏலாது. என்ன நிலைமையை பாருங்க. என் பிள்ளை வேலையும் பாதிக்கப்பட்டு நான் இந்தாலையும் பாதிக்கப்பட்டிருக்கிறேன்.
Soon after the war, the Sri Lankan government made several camps for the civilians caught in the crossfire. Till last year, several thousands were freed from those camps, but many found they have no place to return to. Villages they left back still remains shuttered, and many refugees fear to come back anymore. Maybe both sides are responsible, but should the government of Sri Lanka be allowed to get away with it? The system of international justice will definitely be weakened.
Nobody is condemned. These people are given a second chance for their life. History is forgotten. Let's bury it. Let's start fresh.
Although the government looks for a fresh start, but for these unfortunate Tamil civilians, things will never be the same again.
இப்போ கேட்குறோம் திருப்பியும் தமிழர் ஆயுதம் ஏந்தி வினமா, அது எனக்கு சொல்ல தெரியல. ஆனால் எந்த பிள்ளை மறக்க மாட்டான்னு தான் நான் நினைக்கிறேன். எந்த பிள்ளைன்னு நான் சொல்கிறேன், இதை மாதிரி அங்கே 1000 பிள்ளைகள் இருக்கலாம், லட்சம் இருக்கலாம், அவைகள் மறக்க மாட்டேன்னு நான் நினைக்கிறேன்.
Can you have national unity without reconciliation? Can you have reconciliation without accountability? You know, we may never get justice in terms of what has happened in this country, but we will get the truth, so that if we are to forge ahead into the future, we'll have a good idea as to where we're starting from.
So those were all the top stories in Southasia this week. But what are the other stories that are making headlines across the region? Let's take a look.
At least 25 people have been killed in a US drone strike in the troubled Pakistani tribal region of North Waziristan. Missiles were fired on a large compound in the town of Spinwarm, but 5 women and 4 children in a nearby house were also killed. The area is a haven for Al-Qaeda and Taliban militants. And that's not all. The US military's top officer, Admiral Mike Mullen, on Thursday has accused Pakistan's spy agency of having links with militants targeting troops in Afghanistan. He said Pakistan's inter-services intelligence had a long-standing relationship with a militant group run by Afghan insurgent Jalaluddin Haqqani. The comments came as he held talks in Islamabad on Wednesday. Pakistani officials were also in the United States for talks this week. Pakistan routinely rejects charges of collusion with militants. US officials have in past spoken anonymously or in circumspect terms about association between Pakistani establishment and insurgents. But that with this blunt statement, Admiral Mullen has for the first time claimed a clear link between the two. He said the spy agency's support of the network remained at the core and the most difficult part of the relationship, and that he would take it up with Pakistan's Army Chief General Ashfaq Parvez Kayani. On the other hand, Nepal's capital is suffering acute fuel shortages because the state-owned oil company says it cannot afford to import more fuel from India. The Nepal Oil Corporation says price rise in the wake of Libya crisis have meant it is making a loss on the sale of petrol, diesel and kerosene. The energy crisis has left Kathmandu at the mercy of rolling 14-hour power cuts every day. While tolerant, some residents are starting to lose patience. On the bilateral front, Indian External Affairs Minister S.M. Krishna was on a 3-day visit to Nepal this week starting from Wednesday. Krishna met Nepal's President Ram Baran Yadav, Prime Minister Jalanath Khanal and main opposition leaders. However, it is still not clear if the talks addressed Nepal's severe fuel and electricity shortages.
I would like to convey to the leadership of Nepal that India is committed to working with the people of Nepal for a democratic, stable, peaceful and prosperous Nepal.
Tragic news from Bangladesh. At least 23 people have died and dozens are missing after a ferry carrying more than 100 passengers capsized in a river in eastern Bangladesh on Thursday. The ferry went down after hitting the wreckage of another ferry in the Meghna River in Brahmanbaria, 80 kilometers from the capital Dhaka. Ferry accidents are fairly common in Bangladesh's vast river network and scores are killed every year. Most are blamed on poor safety standards and overcrowding. Last June, about a dozen people died after a packed ferry capsized in storms in northeast Bangladesh. One of India's most revered spiritual leaders, Sri Satya Sai Baba, has died in hospital on Sunday. Doctors say the 84-year-old guru, who is thought to have millions of followers around the world, died following a cardiac arrest. He has been admitted to hospital in hometown of Puttaparthi last month, suffering from respiratory problems and kidney failure.